Hi and welcome to lesson 5 of our Middle East unit. Today we're going to be looking at oil in the Middle East. Now this lesson follows directly on from our lesson about why oil is so important. As always, if you do feel like you missed the lesson or you want to do a bit of catch up, you can find all the lessons so far this year on this YouTube channel for you to access at any point. The activity today is to watch the video, and at the end there will be 3 review questions. I would like you to answer those 3 review questions as well as you can and upload them onto Satchel 1. So if we link back to our last lesson, then the question we have is, well, why do we actually care about oil? And there are 3 reasons why we care about oil. Firstly, it's because it is absolutely vital for everyday life. Our cars, our planes, our trains run on oil, run on petrol, run on diesel, kerosene, which is made from oil. If you remember that image I showed you, things like plastic bags, rulers, the rubber in car tyre, at some point is all made from crude oil. And so if we did not have oil, a lot of the things that we use every single day would not be there. We would find life a lot more difficult, that is for sure. The second reason is that oil is geographically rare. And what that means is it is only found in certain parts of the world. So not every single country can just drill into the ground and find oil. It's only in certain locations. And we looked at a map in the last lesson. We're going to have a little look at that map again in this one here. And then finally, it's all to do with its high value. So oil has a very, very, very high worth. It is worth between $57 and $120 per barrel, and there are billions upon billions of barrels across the world. In the previous lesson, I referred to oil as black gold. Now, black gold obviously basically means it's sort of very, very high value. And nowadays, because it's so vital to everyday life, because it's so geographically rare, as a resource, it is worth a huge amount of money. So, where does this link in with the Middle East? Well, if you remember this map here, the map was showing where the oil was and where it was left. Okay, and if you look at the zoomed in area here, it's showing the Middle East. Now, Saudi Arabia has the largest proven oil reserve in the entire world at 264 billion barrels. Places like Kuwait, the UAE, Iran, and Iraq also have very large amounts as well. And that really begs the question, well, how does that help the Middle East and what impact will that have on the Middle East as an area? And so when we're talking about how oil is impacting the Middle East, it all links back to this concept of development, which we've looked at in the past. And the idea is that there are 3 different countries. We've got LICs, NEEs, and HICs that are all varying levels of development. So places like the UK, Australia, and USA are all HICs, whereas a lot of places in Africa are LICs. Now, if we go back in history, a lot of the Middle East would be usually classed as an LIC. And in fact, nowadays, pretty much every country in the Middle East will come under those 2 categories there. So they are amongst the poorest or amongst the countries that are starting to develop, starting to emerge, but are not yet on the level of the UK, Japan, Australia, etc. So mostly in the Middle East, they are NEEs and LICs. And as such, this is where our oil comes into play. Because we know that oil is worth a huge amount of value, it's called black gold, and in theory, the Middle East would be able to use oil to project its development. So over time, since the discovery of oil, it would be a fair assumption to kind of go with the idea that the Middle East has developed and it has used that oil to develop. Now, obviously, that has not happened in every single country, and we're going to look at that in another lesson as well. But for now, we're going to focus on one place, and that is Dubai. Okay, so these images here are really showing the dramatic change that has occurred in Dubai. In 1990, it was little more than a couple of buildings in the desert. By 2003, we've got our main strand being built, And in 2020, the bottom right-hand corner there, the city is completely unrecognizable to the image in 1990. Okay, so they are very, very, very different. And the picture in 2020, that could be New York, it could be Tokyo, it could be Paris or London in the sense of how developed it is. And that change has happened very, very quickly. It's not like it's taken 100, 200, 300 years to do that. All of that has happened in the space of about 30 years. And this is where our oil really comes into play. Because oil in Dubai has had a major impact. Before we get into that, what I'd like us to do is, I'd like us to do a little bit more geography to really understand why Dubai in particular had become most important. Now, Dubai is not a country, it's actually a city-state within a different country. So, if you have a piece of rough paper now or a Word document open, there are 3 questions on the screen. I'd like to pause this video. I would like you to jot down in rough some answers to those 3 questions. When you've completed it, unpause the video and then carry on. Okay, so hopefully we can see then that it's in the UAE, the United Arab Emirates. It is next to the Arabian Sea, and it is located between Europe, Africa, and Asia. Okay, so let's look at a bit more of the story of Dubai and really understand exactly how it's gone from the image on the left to the image on the right. Well, if we go back to the 1950s, Dubai was a small pearl fishing and trading port. Ships moved in and out, but generally it was very quiet. However, as we've just looked at, its location made it very, very important because it was located between Asia, Europe, and Africa. And that made it very, very linked. And then in 1966, oil was discovered. Okay, so they then discovered there was oil in Dubai. And this is where the story really takes it up a gear now, because that new oil industry meant that lots of workers arrived to help find it and to help sell it. And this meant the city grew very, very fast because people from all over the UAE, all over the Middle East, all over the world were suddenly moving to Dubai to work. And as such, the city grew because they needed houses, they needed apartments, they needed shops. And as a result of that, the city of Dubai was able to generate a huge amount of money, not only from selling the oil to other countries abroad that needed it, which made them a huge amount of money, but also all those people who are now working in Dubai would also be paying small amounts of tax as well. So the government of Dubai was raising huge amounts of money, and as such, they were able to build new roads, new schools, new hospitals that was needed for those workers and needed to help their area develop. And luckily, the money from oil was there to use to pay for it. So they were able to develop very, very, very quickly because the money they had created from oil really enabled them to invest in this superb urban landscape that we now know today as modern Dubai. And it was all because of that oil money. It would also then have a really good impact on development. If there are better schools, better hospitals, and better roads, the quality of life of people in Dubai would increase, their life expectancy would increase, their literacy rate would increase, and Dubai's development might push the UAE from maybe an NEE towards being a HIC in the long term. And this is where the story diverges a little bit here. Because what Dubai realised quite cleverly was that oil is a resource that is finite, in the sense that it will run out eventually. And so they devised this idea that they would try and change how they got their money. So because Dubai started becoming this amazing place with all these buildings, etc., a lot of tourists started visiting. And nowadays, if you go on Instagram, there's so many influencers in Dubai at the moment, and they all bring money into the area, don't they? Which is really, really good for Dubai. And in 2005, only about 17% of their money actually came from oil. A lot of it came from building, and a lot of it came from investment in technology. So companies like Microsoft now have built and developed their technology in Dubai, and it's really allowed them to diversify their income. Because nowadays, like I said, they don't rely on oil as much anymore. They rely on other industries, things like tourism, things like technology, to bring money into the country. And that's a really clever move because in the future, with climate change, if oil does run out, they have now got alternate sources of income which can then fund their country. We've got to be very clear here that oil is playing a huge role because that oil has allowed them to kickstart their development in the first place. That oil has allowed them to start building their infrastructure, to start building the hostels and schools, which enables them to attract tourists and enables them to improve technology as well. And so overall, you'd say that oil has had a very important and very good impact on Dubai and the UAE as a whole. The story for Abu Dhabi, which is another city in the UAE, is very similar. So Abu Dhabi would have a very similar story to Dubai. So to finish this off then, we've got 3 quick review questions. So the first one is outline the 3 reasons why oil is important. That will link back to the start of the lesson with those 3 factors. Explain how Dubai used oil to improve its development. And finally, explain why Dubai no longer relies on oil for its development. As always, the beauty of this video is you can rewind it to listen to me talking again to find your answers, or you can go back and look at the slides, the information on. I'd like to answer and upload these to Satchel 1, and if you have any problems, you can access the live Zoom support.